They didn't even wait until we got home from the cemetery. My wife had been lowered into the ground less than 4 hours before my daughter-in-law pulled out a folder, an actual manila folder, like she'd been carrying it in her purse all morning, and slid it across my kitchen table. "We thought this would be a good time to talk about the house," she said. My son was sitting right next to her. He didn't look at me. "I want to tell you something before I go any further. I'm 67 years old. I worked in civil engineering for 38 years. I've seen bridges collapse on paper. I've reviewed stress calculations at 2 in the morning. I've made decisions that determined whether structures would hold or fail. I know what it looks like when something is about to give way." I recognized the look on my son's face that afternoon. It was the look of a man who had already made a decision and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the same pot I'd made before the funeral, still sitting on the warmer, and I sat down. I didn't open the folder. "Your mother's been gone since this morning," I said, "and you brought a folder." My daughter-in-law smiled the smile she always used when she thought she was being reasonable. "We didn't want there to be any confusion later. You know how these things can get complicated." Complicated. That was the word she used. "Before we begin, I want to ask, where are you listening from today? And how did you find this channel? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading everyone. Let me tell you about my wife. Her name was June. Not the file, not the house, not the estate. June. She grew up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, the second of 4 daughters, and she had a laugh that could fill a room without her even trying. When we were young and broke and sharing a 1-bedroom apartment with a window that didn't close all the way, she used to make soup from whatever was in the cabinet and tell me it was a recipe she'd invented just for us. I believed her every time. She had that gift. We built everything together. The house we're talking about, the one in the folder, we bought it in 1987 for $83,000. It needed a new roof, a new furnace, and more weekends than I can count. I did most of the work myself. June picked out every fixture, every piece of trim, every color on every wall. She planted the garden in the back that still blooms every April like she told it to. We raised 2 kids in that house. My son, who's 41 now, and my daughter, who lives in Portland and couldn't be at the funeral because she was 8 months pregnant. I want to be clear about that. She called me from the hospital parking lot, crying because she couldn't get on a plane. That matters. That's the kind of detail that tells you who someone is. My son and his wife moved back to our town 6 years ago. At the time, I thought it was a blessing. June's health was already starting to decline. Nothing dramatic yet, just the slow accumulation of small things that you tell yourself aren't significant until they are. Having family close seemed like the right thing. My daughter-in-law positioned herself early. That's the only word I have for it. She started coming to June's doctor appointments, taking notes, asking questions. It looked like devotion. I see it differently now. My son has always been the type of person who needed someone to hand him a direction. He's smart, don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about intelligence, but he's always needed the wind to come from somewhere outside himself. When he was a boy, it was his friends. When he was in college, it was whoever he was dating at the time. When he married his wife, it became her. That's not a character flaw, exactly, but it's something I understand better now than I did when he was young. June got her diagnosis 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The doctor, Dr. Abernathy, a quiet man who chose his words like he was placing them carefully on a shelf, sat with us for 45 minutes and explained everything. June held my hand the entire time. On the drive home, she asked me to stop at the pharmacy, and then she asked if we could get ice cream after. She said, "I want to do normal things today." We did normal things. We got ice cream. We sat in the parking lot of a Dairy Queen on a cold November afternoon and ate our cones and watched people come and go, and June told me she wasn't scared. She just didn't want me to be alone. She was more worried about me than about herself. That was June. What I did not tell June, what I could not tell her, because she would have been heartbroken, was what my daughter-in-law said to me 2 weeks after the diagnosis. She called it just being practical. She said, with my son sitting quietly in the corner of my living room, that they had been doing some research about the financial implications of long-term care, about how assets were handled in situations like ours, and that they wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. I asked her what page that was. She said she thought it made sense, given the circumstances, for my son's name to be added to the property deed. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I've been asked many times over the years to make quick decisions under pressure. I learned a long time ago that the best response to something you don't like is silence. Silence makes people fill the space. They say more than they mean to. She filled the space. She talked about property taxes, about ease of transition, about how they were just thinking of my comfort, about how it was really just a formality. When she was done, I said, "I'll think about it." I didn't think about it. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Theodore. No, wait. I keep getting the names mixed up in my head. My attorney's name is Gideon Marsh. He's been my attorney for 22 years, since I hired him to handle a dispute with a contractor. He is methodical, careful, and he does not waste words. I explained what my daughter-in-law had said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Are you surprised?" I said I didn't know. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to make sure June is protected, and I want to make sure that when she's gone, what we built goes where we wanted it to go." Gideon said, "Then let's make sure of that." That was 14 months ago. Over those 14 months, I watched my son become a stranger. Not all at once. It was gradual, like a leak you don't notice until the wall is already soft. He came to Sunday dinners less. When he did come, his wife was always with him, always watching. He stopped calling just to call. Our phone conversations became transactional. "How's Mom?" "She's okay." "Good." There were moments, I want to be fair. There were moments where I saw my son, my actual son, the boy who used to fall asleep on car trips with his face pressed against the window, and he'd look at me with something in his eyes that I can only describe as guilt. He knew. He knew what was happening. He just couldn't find the part of himself that would make him stop it. June declined faster than anyone expected. That's a brutal sentence to write. She declined fast, and the last 2 months were hard in ways I don't have the right words for. I was with her every day. I slept in a chair next to her bed for the last 3 weeks. My daughter flew in from Portland, 8 months pregnant, enormous and exhausted and weeping, and she sat with her mother and held her hand and told her every good thing she could think of. That's who my daughter is. My son came twice in those last 3 weeks. Both times his wife was with him. Both times the visits were short. June passed on a Tuesday morning in March. The light was coming through the window the way it does in early spring, watery and pale, and she had been quiet for most of the night, and then she simply wasn't there anymore. I sat with her for a long time before I called anyone, and then I called Gideon, not because I expected that day to be what it became, but because Gideon had asked me to call him when it happened, so we could prepare for whatever came next. Whatever came next arrived at my kitchen table 4 hours later in a manila folder. I didn't open the folder that evening. I told my daughter-in-law that I was tired and that we would talk later. My son looked at me for a moment, that look again, the guilt, and then he looked at his wife, and they left. My daughter spent the night. We sat up late, the two of us, and we talked about her mother. We looked at photographs. She fell asleep on the couch around midnight, and I put a blanket over her and turned off the lamp and stood in my living room in the dark and felt the particular weight of a house that has known a lot of living. I thought about the folder on the table. I thought about the conversation Gideon and I had started 14 months ago, and all the conversations since. I thought about June in that Dairy Queen parking lot, holding a cone in November, telling me not to be alone. I wasn't planning any of what happened next as revenge. I want to be honest about that. I don't think I'm built for revenge, not the cold, deliberate kind that people seem to admire in stories. What I was doing, from the moment Gideon and I first sat down together, was simply protecting something: the house, the accounts, the small investments June and I had made over decades, quietly and carefully, that my daughter-in-law had clearly researched. I was protecting what we had built from people who thought they could walk in with a folder and a smile and take it apart. Gideon had been thorough. I won't go into every detail. Some of it is still in process, but the short version is this: everything was restructured. The house was placed in a trust. The financial accounts were reorganized. Certain beneficiary designations were changed. All of it was legal. All of it was documented. All of it was done slowly and carefully over 14 months, with the full knowledge that this day might come. I'd also done something else, something Gideon hadn't suggested, but that I'd thought of myself. Late one night when I couldn't sleep, I had started writing things down. Not a diary exactly. I've never been that kind of person. But a record, dates, conversations, the phone call about the property deed. The visit where my daughter-in-law asked about June's jewelry casually, like it was nothing. The Sunday dinner where she mentioned twice that these old houses are so much to maintain. All of it written down, dated, signed, and given to Gideon to keep in his files. I didn't know if I'd ever need it. But I knew that people who come at you with folders have usually been keeping their own records. And I wanted mine to be better. My son called me 3 days after the funeral. I missed the call. I was in the garden, trying to do something with June's roses, which I have absolutely no idea how to care for, but which I am determined to keep alive. I called him back that evening. He said he wanted to apologize for the timing of the conversation at the kitchen table. He said his wife had suggested it, and he should have told her it wasn't the right moment. He sounded like a man reading from a script. I said I appreciated that. He said they still wanted to talk about the house. When I was ready, I said, I think you should probably talk to Gideon. A pause. Your attorney? Yes. Why would we need to talk to your attorney? I said, because the house is in a trust now, and Gideon administers the trust, so any questions about the property go through him. The silence on the phone was different from most silences. It had a texture to it. When did you set up a trust? About 13 months ago, I said. Another silence. The accounts too, he said. You should talk to Gideon, I said. He can explain everything. I heard him say something to his wife, his voice low and muffled, and then the call ended. Gideon told me later that my daughter-in-law called his office 3 times the next day. His assistant told her each time that Gideon would reach out at his earliest convenience to schedule a call. Gideon is not a man who moves at other people's pace. What happened over the next 2 weeks? I only know partially. I know my son called my daughter in Portland because my daughter told me. She said he was frustrated and that his wife was really upset. My daughter listened, she told me, and then she said, Did you ever ask Dad what he wanted? She told me he didn't have a good answer for that. He came to my house on a Saturday, without his wife, which surprised me. I made coffee and we sat at the same kitchen table where this had all started. The folder long gone, and he looked older than I remembered. He's 41, but he looked, in that moment, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a while. He said, I should have handled things differently. I didn't say anything. He said, I think I let things get away from me. I said, I think you did too. Are you angry at me? I thought about that. Not about what to say. I already knew what I wanted to say, but about whether I meant it. I'm not angry, I said. I'm sad. There's a difference. He nodded. I watched your mother decline for 14 months, I said. I was there every day. You know how many times you came. He looked at the table. I'm not saying this to punish you. I'm saying it because you asked if I was angry, and the honest answer is that what I feel is closer to grief. I'm grieving your mother, and I'm grieving the version of my son I thought I knew. He didn't try to argue. I'll give him that. We talked for 2 hours. It wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't resolved, and there were no dramatic breakthroughs. Real life doesn't work like that, in my experience. What it was honest, which is more than we'd managed in a long time. Before he left, he asked about the trust. Specifically, he asked if there was any flexibility in how it was structured. I said, You mean is there a way for you to get a piece of the house? He had the grace to look embarrassed. The trust is what it is, I said. Your sister is in it. You're not right now. That's not permanent. Nothing has to be permanent. But it reflects where we are today, not where I hoped we'd be. He left without his wife having gotten what she came for. I don't know what he told her. I know that she called me once, 2 days later, using a tone I'd never heard from her before, softer, more careful, something approximating humility, and said that she hoped I knew they just wanted to be helpful, that family should take care of each other. I let her talk. When she was done, I said, I agree. Families should take care of each other. I watched your husband's mother for 14 months, around the clock. That's what taking care of each other looks like. When you're ready to do that kind of taking care of, we can talk about what that means for the family. She didn't have a response to that. The roses are doing better than I expected. I've been watching videos on YouTube, which feels like something June would have found very funny. There's apparently a whole system to pruning them, and I've been doing it wrong for 20 years without knowing. The garden looks strange without her in it. Everything looks a little strange without her in it. My daughter calls every other day. She had her baby, a girl, 3 weeks after the funeral. I flew to Portland for the birth and held my granddaughter in the hospital room, and she was so small and so certain of herself, the way newborns are, like they've already decided to be here and they're just getting oriented. My daughter named her June. I sat with that for a long time. My son has been coming around more, not at his wife's direction, I don't think, or maybe partly, I can't know for certain, but he's been showing up. He came and helped me move some furniture. He came and sat in the garden with me one evening and didn't say much. He came for Easter, and that time his wife came too, and it was awkward in the way that things are when too much has been said and too much has been left unsaid at the same time. But they came. I don't know what our future looks like. I know what I'm protecting, and I know why, and I know that Gideon has everything in order. I know that the house will go where June and I decided it would go, not where a Manila folder tried to redirect it. I know that my daughter is in Portland with a new baby named June and calls me every other day. I know that some mornings I still make 2 cups of coffee by habit. I know that the trust is not a punishment. It's a record of where we were when it was written. It can be amended. It can be changed. Relationships can move, if people move them. But that movement has to be earned. That's the part I couldn't explain to my daughter-in-law on the phone. You don't just show up with a folder. You show up with yourself, your actual self, your presence, your time, your willingness to sit in a hospital chair and be there when it's hard, and you earn the things that matter. June knew that. She knew it without ever having to say it. She just lived it, for 43 years, for me and for our children and for everyone she loved. I keep her recipes in a box on the kitchen counter, all of them handwritten, some of them with notes in the margins. Add more garlic than you think. Elliot doesn't like pepper, and every time I open the box, it's like hearing her voice. I think I'll be okay. I'm not there yet, but I think I'll get there. And wherever you're listening from today, whether you're in Michigan or Manila or Edinburgh or right down the road from me somewhere, I hope you know that the things you build over a lifetime are worth protecting. The house, the garden, the recipe box, the people who show up. Protect what matters, and don't let anyone slide a folder across your table before the coffee's even gone cold.